What's up, fellas? It's the Black Rose here, and in this one we're going to talk about Shattered Space, which is Starfield's upcoming DLC. Based on this title, I think this expansion will revolve around the Armistice. This document is what keeps settled space at peace, so for space to shatter, this is the thing that needs to break. How might that happen? Well, the UC and FC both seem satisfied with the current state of the settled system, so I don't see why they would break it. The unknown factor is House Va'ruun. They disappeared for unknown reasons, yet they still have field agents in the settled systems. There's also the Va'ruun Zealots, who on the surface appear to be independent, but beneath the surface it seems like that may not be the case. So there are lots of unknowns with House Va'ruun. They're a wild factor, so they're likely going to be the cause of this upcoming shattering. It's heavily implied throughout the game that they could return to the settled systems at any time. So this is likely going to be where Shattered Space starts. House Va'ruun will likely return in some capacity. Some fans have speculated that they could start a second Serpent's Crusade, which could be true. However, I can see other ways that this could unfold. First, maybe the looming threat that House Va'ruun could be planning something will prompt the UC or FC or both to prepare. Perhaps they'll send spies to wherever House Va'ruun goes after coming back, and the spies will then get caught. Or maybe they'll start up xeno-warfare labs and mech factories again, thinking they might each need good militaries soon and get caught doing that. Another possibility is maybe House Va'ruun has some spies already placed in Aquila and New Atlantis, and they'll influence the factions into violating the Armistice somehow. Now let's make some predictions about the main questline for Shattered Space. I think the most obvious quest objective is locating Va'ruun Kai at some point. So how might we go about doing that? The easiest place to start would be posing as one of the smugglers they use for supplies, or capturing then interrogating someone that knows where it is. But a person with that knowledge won't be easy to come by, since even their field operatives don't know how to get back. There's also a question pertaining to role-playing that we need to ask here. Will the player be able to join House Va'ruun? Bethesda loves giving players the power of choice, so will they do it here? If yes, then I could see it playing out very much like joining the Institute in Fallout 4. Maybe once we arrive at Va'ruun Kai, we'll have the option to join up and betray whoever helped us get there. So if we can choose, then my guess is we'll be picking between House Va'ruun, the UC, and the FC. But can we choose? There is something that makes me hesitate to just go ahead and predict yes. Before the release date, now former BGS dev Will Shen said that the factions are independent from each other. And we know that they've had Shattered Space planned since before the launch because it's part of the Premium Edition package. So, it's likely that Will Shen knew whether or not we'd be choosing between factions in Shattered Space when he said that. I mean, by September they had already picked that title and were calling it a story expansion, so they'd have the general picture of what that story is going to be, though it could be that he was only talking about the base game since Shattered Space was still under wraps. But the way he said it made it sound like it's a game-making philosophical decision for this game. So, I'm not sure what to make of this. I hope we will be able to join House Va'ruun, but I'm not sure we will. Now let's speculate about what House Va'ruun's plan might be. Obviously, they'll be preparing for the Great Serpent's much anticipated awakening, but let's talk specifics. What exactly are they going to do? I'm thinking that the artifacts, the temples, the unity, all the gravity magic stuff is going to be involved in this somehow. Perhaps House Va'ruun is going to try to use them to wake the Great Serpent somehow. I suppose maybe they'll look to occupy certain ones with unique properties in order to serve this purpose. I mean, this one on Hyla 2 resembles a scorpion, and it guides the spacefarer to a star in the Scorpius constellation, where they find the hunter and the emissary on board a starborn ship called the Scorpius. So perhaps in Shattered Space we'll find another location like the Scorpion on Hyla 2 that looks like a snake, and it will send us to a star in the Serpents constellation, where we will find a starborn ship called the Serpents or maybe the Serpentis, and the starborn that it belongs to will be the key to finding Va'ruun Kai. Or maybe there's a combination of a few locations that together form a snake. And maybe House Va'ruun will somehow use these things to create gravitational conditions that allow for the Great Serpents to grav jump into the settled systems from wherever it currently is. I think this would be a really neat main mission line. Speaking of the Great Serpent, let's dive a bit deeper. I already did a detailed video on this, but I have some additional thoughts. To bring everyone up to speed, in that video I established that House Va'ruun and the Great Serpent have curious ties to Elder Scrolls. The strongest evidence for this is that many proper nouns related to House Va'ruun have Elnifex roots. But the main theory I presented in that video was that the Great Serpent is seemingly inspired by an Elder Scrolls character named Lorkhan, and some commenters quickly suggested that it could also be Alduin. For those who don't know, Alduin is the main antagonist of Skyrim. I had considered this notion as well during that video's production, but ultimately went against it. However, now I'm considering a slightly adjusted idea. Really, this whole Great Serpent concept seems to be based on what's called an Ouroboros, which is a snake or multiple snakes eating itself over and over in a circle. This appears in a few different cultures and usually represents the cycle of renewal. So perhaps the Great Serpent is both Lorcan and Alduin in a multi-snake Ouroboros. I mean, if this is all Elder Scrolls inspired, then really the thing we should look to here is the myth of Sadakal the Worldskin, which is the Yakutin creation story. It's very allegorical, but the model of the world the story presents is an Ouroboros. It's one snake, but it has a lot of these other entities living inside of it. So maybe that's the kind of thing we're dealing with here. Maybe there's inspiration from multiple Elder Scrolls characters, such as Lorcan and Alduin, and they're all part of the Great Serpent. I also think there are ties to the Norse Ouroboros Jormungandr, because in that story Odin banishes Jormungandr to the sea, and in Starfield space is often metaphorically alluded to as an ocean. I think Vladimir often calls it the Blackest Sea. Also, Will Shen is deep into Norse mythology, which I actually learned directly from him when they did that Discord AMA just a month or so before the release. He was talking a bit about mythology, so I asked what specific ones he's into, and he replied, "I was a big fan of the Greek and Norse myths as a kid. The stories were very big and characters are flawed and have clear motivations." And I was like, awesome, he actually replied. Another thing I want to revisit about the Great Serpent video is the Venom trees. I said that these trees seem to be able to communicate with each other, and commenters were quick to point out that this is very much like the Hist in Elder Scrolls. And they are absolutely right, I totally missed that, so if any of you are watching, very good eyes, kudos. Truth is, I really rushed that video because when I noticed the Elnifex roots, I was like, if I picked up on this, then there's no way that other content creators are far behind me. And I wanted to make sure to get my video on it out first. But there wasn't as much competition as I thought there would be. So the lesson is take your time with videos like this, Rosie. Now back to these communicating trees. There's a mission line where the player helps a scientist named Kelton Frush figure out what's going on with the flora in New Atlantis. Apparently, the big tree in New Atlantis is sending out signals looking for some sort of response. So, could this actually be coming from Ambassador Balmor's Venom tree? Is this Balmor trying to contact Dazra? I think it is. I mean, we know that his Venom tree has really dug itself into the ground, so I think it's very feasible that it does reach all over the city, and maybe it somehow assimilates into other flora or vice versa. And this leads to a question. Balmor's last entry says that Dazra has finally responded to his calls. However, could that have actually been the signal that the Spacefarer and Kelton send as a response to the big tree during Out on a Limb? Well, the irony would be fitting, but that would assume that the Spacefarer does things in a certain order. It assumes that they did all of Kelton's missions prior to friends like these. So I do think that Bethesda wants us to consider this possibility, but I think it's ultimately a misdirect. I believe that Dazra has indeed made contact with Ambassador Balmor and that his last journal entry is foreshadowing Shattered Space. The last prediction I'll make here is that this expansion will further explore Andreja as a character, in a similar way to how Nick Valentine was developed more in the Far Harbor DLC. We'll probably get more backstory for Andreja, and I think the events of Shattered Space will test her as an individual rather than as a member of House Varun or Constellation. That's it for this one, folks. Those are my thoughts and predictions for Shattered Space. I'm also working on a video in which I talk about some other DLC ideas that I've come up with as suggestions for the kinds of things or directions that Bethesda could go in. So subscribe to stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.